Hello and welcome to Life Under Lockdown, and today we're going to the capital to talk to a Dominican Friar, Father Lawrence Lew. Welcome, Father.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to meet you, at least online, because I don't think we've met before in the flesh, have we?
No, we haven't met in the flesh. I'm a very big admirer of your work online. You are an evangelizer through the means of photography and some videos as well. So it's really, really fascinating. So how did you get involved with that?
Almost by accident, really. I've been taking photographs certainly for as long as I've been in the order. That's 15 years since I joined the novitiate. And I initially just took up taking photographs as a kind of way to get me out of the cloister. So I would, go around and I knew I was going to be living in Cambridge, where the novitiate was, and I knew that Cambridge had lots of beautiful churches, most famously King's College, right? And I thought, okay, so I could just take pictures of, stained glass and sacred art, because I've always had a love and fascination with church buildings and the art in them. So I started doing this, and I asked my father to buy me a camera before I entered, because this was a digital camera, because it's a cheap, once you had the camera, it's a cheap hobby to have, right? It's not like in the old days when I was, well, before you were born, probably, you had to always take the film to be developed. And then I always got disappointed because, my photographs weren't that good and it cost a lot of money to buy the film and to develop it. But with digital cameras, you could just do it over and over again, take the picture over and over again until you were happy with it. So it seemed like a cheap hobby to do. And then I started blogging a little bit, and I had the photographs in Flickr because I didn't know how to embed the photographs in my blog except to link to Flickr. So I use Flickr as like an external hosting site to host the pictures. And I had them sort of hot linked, or whatever the word is, into the blog, right? Embedded into the blog. And then when I went to Oxford as a student brother after my novitiate, through Flickr, I began to explore Flickr a bit more. And I realized, there are groups in Flickr of people who like going to visit churches or who like stained glass windows. So I put my photographs in those groups, and I just started to notice there were people in the Oxford area. So I messaged them and I said, hey, I don't drive. I notice you go and visit a lot of churches. If you got a spare space in your car, would you mind a Dominican friar tagging along? And it was, like I said, it's just a way to get me out of the priory, out of, writing my essays. And I thought it was a healthy thing to do, to just have an afternoon off or whatever it was. And I've been taught to have an afternoon off by my novice master. So it then became something more as I started taking more photographs, continued putting them on Flickr, and people started to notice these photos and, asking if they could use them for various things. And these friends of mine who I met whilst photographing churches, they helped me enormously as well, because, they said to me, what setting are you using on your camera? And I said, P, which is sort of program auto exposure. And they said, oh, you really must try taking your photographs with manual. So I said, well, it looks very intimidating. I have no idea what to do. So many different elements to fiddle with. And they said, well, with your digital camera, it's very easy because you see the results immediately on your screen. And so they explained very briefly, literally in 5 minutes or less. And they said, yeah, just play with it. And so I did. And so I started to use the manual and enjoy photography a lot more as a skill and as an art. And that's kind of how it happened, really by accident and just by being present online.
Yeah, it's incredible. But, there's more that, to me, your work seems more than a hobby. It seems that it's some sort of, obviously you are religious, but it seems that there's a kind of apostolic aspect to it. Your work captures the beauty of the church, your churches that you visit and the photograph. I like the things you took in Paris, in France, the Royal Chapel. Amazing, really, really good stuff.
Well, thank you. I mean, it did begin as a hobby. And I say, if a hobby can be used to glorify God, that's a wonderful thing. And it certainly began as a hobby, but I guess some of my friends on Flickr said to me that they've noticed over the years how my photography had a more, as you say, evangelical, apostolic kind of focus. And certainly the commentaries that I write with every single photograph, which I still do every single day, the photographs that I put up every day on Flickr are a commentary on the liturgy of the day. So if it's a saint's day, you'll see the saint's picture. Like yesterday, St. George, we had 3 different images of St. George from 3 different countries. And on a day like that, I like to challenge myself. I choose 1 statue, 1 stained glass, and 1 mosaic, or something like that. 3 different media, right, to show how you can depict the same saint in different ways and over the ages. Or if the gospel reading today, for example, is the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000. Normally, I would have an image like that from in stained glass image, and I would put it up with a commentary on that. It might be a quotation from Pope Benedict or from Pope Francis from a homily, or something from the fathers of the church, and I kind of use that as a commentary to caption my photograph. And I do that every day. I've been doing that every day for almost 15 years.
Well, if you aren't following Fr Lawrence, we will link you up in the description of this video, so you check out his fantastic work. How is it? How do you think your daily patterns of life have changed since this lockdown? Is it any different for yourself as a religious?
No, actually. I mean, one of the joys of being religious and in a sort of quasi-monastic setting like I'm in, is that our life has always been shaped by the life of prayer. So the divine office is what we do. That's the liturgy of the hours. So we begin with the sung liturgy in the morning. We have mass together, and we have evening prayer and night prayer and so on. So the liturgy of the hours is something that we do, and that gives us great structure. So Holy Week, for example, for us here in St. Dominic's in London, didn't change very much. I mean, obviously, the church was not full of people, and obviously our organist and our choir couldn't come in. But in moments like that, we go back to our tradition, meaning we had lots of Gregorian chant. I'm the cantor of this house, so I just take out the gradual and I sing from the gradual, all the ordinaries, which is kind of my preference anyway. And no hymns at all. We just sing straight from the gradual. Obviously, we sing the Mass Ordinary, as we always do. So all that was, in a sense, scaled back, but felt much more monastic. And some of the brothers commented that they really enjoyed that very prayerful, contemplative aspect. But of course, we are preachers, friars, preachers, who are sent out to preach the gospel in all manners of preaching, and to hand on the fruit of our contemplation, what we learn and study. So of course, that's the one thing I miss the most, is the daily sermon, the preaching to the people. But of course, we have opportunities like this to talk through whatever, Zoom, Skype, whatever you want nowadays. And this morning I did a podcast with Brendan Thompson for Catholic Voices. I know you spoke to him recently.
Yeah.
And tonight I'm talking to you. A few weeks ago I was talking to Sam Guzman with Catholic Gentlemen. So there are wonderful opportunities to preach in this way. And the one different thing that we've done at this time is we've prayed the Rosary every day at 12 noon in common, the prior and myself. And from Monday to Fridays at 12 noon, we've been live streaming it.
That's something that I wanted to talk to you about. Obviously, you are at the Rosary Shrine, and one of your big devotions is the Rosary. Yeah. And I think a lot of people we're hearing are turning back to doing that practice. It's something which I've found great fruit in over the last year, certainly. But I have to admit, as I've said previously before, that like everything, sometimes in life you get distracted, you don't do it quite too frequently. Yeah. But since the start of this crisis, I've felt going on the advice of a young boy who lived here not far from me. And
yes, I read that, yes.
Yeah, Joe Wilson. He was very, very keen on the Rosary and had a big devotion during his life. So I was reading his diary again, trying to pick up my spirits during the start of this lockdown. And I just had an inspirational moment to say, let's just do a family Rosary together. Yeah. And we've done it every single night. And you know what? The transformation has been extraordinary, really, really powerful. Yes. For families. So I'd encourage, what would your insight be into people saying the Rosary these days?
Well, I certainly agree that praying with someone else, people you live with, especially like me praying with my brothers, praying with the prior, I think that heals a relationship, So a religious community is not very different from a family where you live with people that you didn't choose, but God chose for you. And under the lockdown conditions, we see a lot more of each other and spend a lot more time together, and we might rub up against each other a bit more, and we find it difficult to get away from each other, right? Normally you can sort of escape to your jobs or whatever it is, or to your friends. Now we can't. And that is entirely what God wants. Because if you cannot love your neighbor, who is literally, in your house, how can you love God? Right? So we must learn to love our neighbor. And so during lockdown conditions, we have to learn, we are forced to do this. And I think it's the work of God's grace. Now, what helps us to love one another, I really believe, is to pray together. And not just formal prayer. So it's not like a family going to mass together, but something like praying the rosary together, where you take turns leading the rosary. One person says one decade, another one leads the next decade, and so on. Why is this? Because Mary is our mother, and mothers have a special job, I think, of bringing the family together. Certainly in my family, mum would often put on a meal, and that's when we see each other, right? And our Blessed Mother has, as it were, put on a rich feast for us, the rich feast at the banquet of the Rosary. And she invites us to pray the Rosary with her, to be with her. Or you like another image, the Rosary is like a rose garden. And she invites us to walk through her rose garden. And as it were, to savor the beauty of the roses. That's the mysteries that are presented to us. I don't know if you read The Secrets of the Rosary by Saint Louis-Marie de Montfort. His feast day is coming up next week.
I haven't read it, but I've touched upon quotes from it, and people reference it quite a lot, so I need to definitely do that.
It's a great read. It's beautifully organized. It's organized like a rose garden. So he talks about there are 150 roses, which are his 150 points, as it were, throughout the book. That's how he arranges it. And he talks, you want to talk about the power of the Rosary, the miracles of the Rosary. Well, I would only just be telling you what Saint Louis-Marie de Montfort has already told you. So he's a wonderful saint of the Rosary, a Dominican tertiary, a third order Dominican, and a secular priest. That I will be talking about him next week on his feast day. In fact, I'm cooking on his feast day. So I've been planning a menu of Rosary-inspired foods. My brothers and I'm making 15 dishes.
Well, we'll share that out and make sure people can tune into that as well. That'd be because that's one thing you've also got a photographic interest in as well. Your delicate food choices and teas.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
Well, it's just it's this fundamental belief that beauty is a part of our everyday life, and especially in this Easter season where we celebrate the enormous generosity of God, who does marvels beyond our imaginings. I find that we can celebrate, we can and we should celebrate the Easter octave at least, and celebrate it intensely with celebrations like lots of food and this kind of thing. And very often the food is what I would call humble food. It's not actually, it doesn't have to be costly, but it's the way it's presented that makes all the difference. It's what I call the Japanese aesthetic. In Japan, a cup of tea can be presented with great simplicity but beauty because it's done with great aesthetic care. And even something like a leaf that they've picked off the ground and they just arranged on a simple black tray, it just looks good. Now, I guess I've got a kind of artistic eye because I'm a photographer. So with a photographer's eye, I sort of see beauty all around me. And one of the things I enjoy doing, the challenge, is to see beauty in everyday things. Again, there's a wonderful book by a Japanese philosopher called The Beauty of Everyday Things. And I've been reading that. Part of the Japanese aesthetic is precisely to discover the beauty of ordinary things. So I guess beautiful food, beautiful cups, and all that kind of stuff. It's all about, yes, we're doing ordinary things, just having a cup of tea, but it doesn't have to be done without any elegance. Why is that? I think it's to give honor to the gifts that God gives us. That very cup of tea, which we take for granted, and the milk that's in it, is given by God. So that's kind of.
No, I think it's a really interesting thought, and I think during this pandemic
about this, to be honest.
But it's just a really interesting thought because, yeah, you're correct. You can see God in everything in some senses, His hand in everything, and I think amidst this terrible period of suffering and darkness in the world, there is still beauty. I'm still seeing beauty every single day. And since Easter and since the start of this lockdown, I've completely reversed my whole view of each day. You know, each day seems much more brighter. The sky seems bluer.
Yes.
The birds are singing better and stronger. So it's just trying to take out a positive in a negative situation.
I mean, we all know the story of the Lord of the Rings, or many of us will know the story. Or at least, even if we've not read that enormous book, we would have seen the movies, right? And you might say that that was a time of great darkness that these hobbits had to go through, that the peoples of Middle-earth had to go through. Great, great darkness. And yet, that is not the focus of Tolkien's writing at all, but the beauty of the relationships in the Fellowship of the Ring, right? The beauty of the relationship between Sam and Frodo, for example. And I think that beauty is always present because, as St. Paul says, where sin abounds, grace abounds all the more. And that's a really profound thought, isn't it? I mean, not just that where sin abounds, grace abounds. It's not equal for equal, like for like, as it were. Although sin has nothing, right? In the intimistic sense, sin is a nothing, it has no being, whereas grace obviously is the fullness of being. But what St. Paul actually says is something much more amazing, and something that I've seen about God and the way God works, is that he is ever abundant and generous and creative in a way that completely blows our minds and blows our imaginations. You know, heaven is like that, St. Paul says, right? What eye has never seen and ear has never heard. This is what he declares to us, the glories of heaven. And we will never understand that. But everything we do, our Easter joy, our outward expressions using the material good things that are given to us, all this is part of how we point in a very limited way to the endless beauty that is God. And so my photography has always been essentially, yes, about preaching the gospel by taking photographs of scenes from the gospels and so on, the lives of saints. But on another more fundamental level, I've always wanted to show people that, as Hopkins says, the world is charged, right, with the glory, the grandeur of God, right? The whole world is full of his glory. The Dominican saint, who's actually the patron saint of scientists, Saint Albert the Great, he said that the world is a book. The whole world is a book in which we can read about God, right? So looking to the beauty of the world. So I'm a great believer that what we must do is to seek the beauty of God present everywhere and in all situations. And similarly then, I've been saying quite a lot this week, I was saying just to Brendan earlier today, that when we talk of God's providence in these difficult times, what I mean by this is that God is doing something good, and he is bringing good out of the sadness and the sorrow of our human conditions. And I think what he is bringing out of all this, for example, is this deep, deep thirst and hunger for the Holy Eucharist. And it comes with great suffering. But they say suffering is you only feel suffering, experience suffering because you love. And so because the people who long for the opening of our churches feel this suffering, they realize finally, perhaps what they not realized before, how much they love God, their church, their local parish church, and how much they love the Eucharist. And that's
that's an absolutely wonderful way to end. I think you certainly presented a very, very uplifting interview. You have a great outlook on life, and that definitely comes across through your work, and I've always been a great admirer, and I'm glad that we actually can do this and chat today, you know, because it's a good opportunity to reach out. I feel like I've traveled the world. I've been stuck in my room.
Well, it's great talking to you, because I have a great love for Scotland. Of course, I was chaplain for 4 years in Edinburgh University at St. Albert's, and it was my first assignation. So as a newly ordained priest, I was sent to St. Albert's for 4 years. I loved Edinburgh, loved Scotland, have friends in Scotland. And I must admit, I was somewhat taken aback and a bit surprised when you referred to London as the capital city, because most Scots will tell me that no, there are two countries, in fact, and Scotland has its own capital, and that's in Edinburgh. But then again, you're in Glasgow, right? So maybe you don't want to...
have pointed that out. I'm going to get slaughtered out by my fellow Scots.
Okay. In JP's defense, because he's a Glaswegian, or at least he lives in Glasgow, he doesn't want to admit that Edinburgh is his capital. He'd rather say that London is the capital.
Thank you for that. You saved yourself there. Anyway, thanks for your time, Father, and I hope you keep safe, and we'll direct people towards your Flickr and your content, because it's absolutely worth seeing during this time.
Sure. Thank you very much.
God bless. Keep praying for me.
Yes.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.